Hi, welcome to the small shed. This week we're starting a new project and I'm afraid it's another bench. See you in a minute. Now the Morrison supermarket close to our shed in Bromsgrove at Menning Sheds has a community champion, and what they do is he's got a budget of, I don't know, a couple £100 a month or something, that he can go around local volunteer groups, charities, things like that, and disperse money and goods to appropriately to them. And he calls in the shed quite often and drops us off biscuits and tea and coffee and all that sort of thing, and it's a great way of engaging with the local sort of community, and it helps everybody out. The other day they came up and said they wanted a memorial bench in their, I think it's their own gardens or whatever, for their staff at the supermarket for one of the people who had passed away, I think. And what he basically said was, if you can make one cheaper than I can buy one, I'll pay you what we would pay to buy one. And so this is how this has come about. I've been out and found a bench that is suitable. We've pretty much agreed on the design and everything, and first step was to go out and buy some material. This is really for the back, so I'm going to start on the back piece because it's the most complex, and we'll take it from there. Now I need to get a 6 foot length out of this for the back of the bench, but rather than cut a 3.6 in half, that will end up with a piece with a great big knot in it there, and a piece with some shakes and a knot in it up there. I'm just going to cut, see if I can get 1.8 out that way, which I should be able to. Without, yeah, 1.8 will do me from there to here. So I'm going to cut it down so that it's a usable piece and I can get that dry then. Okay, so I've spent the morning down at Menning Sheds cutting the back piece that I've got, about 1.9 I've got out of that lump of wood that I'd got, so I've got something to work with there. And I've cut all of the slats. I've thinned them down to about 35mm, and the reason for that is so I don't end up with a problem when I come to put these two together. I want to retain the round over on the top rail, front and back, so that any water will drip down that way, rather than if they're flush it'll just lie in there. So we've got all the slats cut roughly to length. I've now got to sort out a means of getting rebates, tenons, mortises and things done to put it all together. But first I think I need to measure up how many of the slats I need and get the spacing sorted. So that's got the whole thing marked out. It leaves me with about 3 slats spare out of the timber that I cut this morning. I'm just doing an equal spacing between the slats and the gaps. So what I'll do now is come up with a solution to producing a tenon on one end of them. They're all very slightly different in length. That will be trimmed to suit once I've got the tenons cut on one end. I left myself about 25mm too much. That means that if I do cut one wrong, I've got the opportunity to just recut it on one end at least, so that will at least halve the risk of having to throw one of these slats away. And I can select the three worst, if you like, because a couple of them are a little bit, the grain's picked up a bit and they haven't planed very well. So next thing is to go with the tenons. Now I'm not sure, I could do it with the circular saw, set it up on a jig on the table, but I think I'm inclined, because it's there and set up, to go with the router. So I'm going to have a go with the router and see if I can get a tenon made on one end that will be repeatable. Okay, so the router seems to be a suitable means of getting the tenon sorted out. It will need the corners rounding off if I'm going to use a router to do the pocket, or I'll have to square up the holes in the other pieces of timber, but I think rounding those off will be the answer to do that. But it's given me a good consistent tenon that I can just tidy up with a chisel should I need to do, and it'll give me a consistent size. Having done that, of course, then the next thing will be to do a jig to make up the pocket in the other timber, and we'll see how we get on with that next. Now for the pockets, the mortises, just marked on the bit of scrap timber the sort of spacing that I'll need widthways on this rail, and I've hunted around amongst the scrap and I've found some of the stuff we got from the scrap store that is a moulding, and actually that goes beautifully either side to give me the rebate size that I need, or at least can adjust, but actually that's almost a perfect fit. So I think I'm going to make this into a jig with a piece across the top, front to back. That will give me a stop. It'll hold it flat. It'll give me a stop. We can plunge cut in and then make the opening that we need, using this as the guide for the guided bit. So I'm just going to put that together, and hopefully we'll have something we can just lift on and off and slide along, maybe with a register in the back end of it to slot into the hole that we've just done, if you see what I mean. But I think I'm just going to put this together first with a top plate on it. Okay, so I think that's got the basic jig sorted. I've just got a bit of the old fretboard off one of the guitars, the maple, across the top to hold those pieces together, and a couple of little infills to make it all a regular sized hole at the bottom. But that now slots nicely over the top of that rail, and in theory it means if I go in with a plunge now I can do a routed hole that is a tight fit for the actual upright. And as I say, we'll have rounded corners, so I may have to round these corners off to fit afterwards, but I think that's the starting point, and I can then worry about how I have something to register the next hole up, if you like, one side or the other, so that I can move along and do them at a regular basis. Or I could just mark them out on the top and get some sort of mechanism to just clamp these two together. Right, so that's the rebate, the mortise housed out. I can go deeper. I've got a set of bits that go bigger and bigger, so I can go deeper than that, and I will have to when I finish it, but this was really to try the jig out. That gives me what I want. I've just rounded over the corners of the tenon, and that gives me a nice tight push fit. So with a bit of glue, obviously it'll have to be deeper, but that will work nicely as a job to go together. I'm just going to cut the end off it and see how it looks when it snugs up against the edge here. This is just, again, just to see what it looks like. Obviously, as I say, it'll be deeper when it's finished, but yeah. Now that's exactly what I wanted. It gives me that little bit of round over before I get onto the vertical pieces. So all I need to do now is adapt the jig to make that it's got to be, I think, 90mm away, if I remember right, because this is a 45mm piece of wood, so the spacing has got to be 90. Right, I've spent 10 minutes making a piece of maple to go in that slot that didn't quite fit, and then realised that the piece I'd cut off the bottom of the tenon will fit in there perfectly, so that now fits in there nicely. So that gives me a spacing that I can just take that out every time I want to and move it along. That will give me a jig to go all the way along and drill the 20-40 holes that I've got to drill or router out, and we'll be getting somewhere. Right, so that's got the 20 slats done at one end. They're a bit scabby, but it's not exactly joinery timber that we're using, but just a quick wipe across with a chisel will tidy these up, and then of course all the corners have got to be rounded off. But they're all the same, they're all the same size, and all I've got to do now is get them to the right length, and then I can do the other ends. So I need to establish how long between the actual shoulder of the tenon on either end, and then I'll add 25mm for the other tenon at the other end, and set up a stop on the chop saw, and we can cut them all to exactly the right length. Right, so that's got the first one done. I've only got another 20 to do, or thereabouts. There's actually 19 left, because that one is the one I did originally and will be too short, but I can always keep it if I need to and just have a shorter tenon on it. But I think we should be okay. I think I only actually need 17, I think, for the chair. But we'll just clean this one up. I shall run up the corners later on with a round over bit on the router table, and then we can sand all the pieces individually. Probably do that down at Menin Sheds. Right, well that's got the back started as far as I can up to now. I've got all the slats in the vertical back section with all of the tenons taken out, rounded all the edges over, and they all fit. So next time we'll be getting the mortices done on this back piece, both in the top and the bottom pieces of that, and hopefully we can get it all glued up. And I think that probably breaks the back of it then. There are two side pieces which are fairly large chunks of wood that will need a little bit of work doing in terms of joinery rather than just screwing lumps of wood together. But I think this one, by the sheer monotony of having to do everything, you know, 16 or 17 times 2, has been the one that's taking most of the time. So I hope that was of interest. We'll be doing something different next week. Look forward to seeing you then. Bye!